Okay. Okay. Welcome, everybody. We'll call the budget meeting, committee meeting to order. We'll just start right off the bat with budget chair election. Our first order of business is to elect a budget committee chair. Are there any nominations?
I have a nomination for Ryan Dunlap as budget committee chair.
Second.
Wonderful, thank you. If there are no additional nominations, hearing no further nominations for the committee chair are closed. We will now vote on the nomination. All those in favor, Ryan Dunlap, say aye. Aye. All those opposed? Okay, motion passes. How many of us are here? 1, 2, 3, 8. 8-0. Okay, that's it. Congratulations, Ryan. You get the gavel.
Oh.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, right here.
Exactly. That's. Not making yeah.
Put that down.
Great. Okay, are we reviewing the budget committee's responsibilities now?
Let me just do a quick intro first, and then we'll get right to those in just a second. So tonight, thank you all for coming, first of all. Thank you, Ryan, for serving as chair of this meeting. The agenda is on the screen for what we're going to talk about tonight. As Ryan was quite excited to do, we'll talk about the role of the budget committee in just a second. We got to look at our strategic design, take a look at some a lot of financial information, and then we'll look at the appropriations and tax levy amounts, which is actually one of the major things the budget committee approves, and then we'll go over our new budget document really quickly, and then we'll move forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ryan to cover the role of the budget committee.
Okay, so our role as the budget committee is we're the means for the public to participate in the budget process. We also review the proposed budget. We receive budget message and budget documents, as well as we listen to comments from other citizens. That's our role of the budget committee. Some of the actions that we're responsible for, so we review proposed budgets at the major fund and function levels. We ensure budget is in line with overall district goals. Ensure the budget is reasonable and justifiable based on prior audited year's financials and forecasts for the upcoming year. And then ultimately, we approve the budget and set the tax rate. And then oftentimes you get the question, what's outside of scope of the budget committee? So salaries and benefits is outside of scope, contract terms, staffing levels, policies, as well as service or program offerings are outside of scope of the budget committee.
Okay. Thank you very much. So typically, one thing that's one thing that's always a part of a budget in Oregon is the superintendent's budget message. And that is in text in your packets and linked to the agenda for folks at home. And we've sort of summarized it in a few slides, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Downs. Well, the highlights of this message.
Yeah, and I think we'll make this very interactive. We've done this in a dance form tonight.
Oh,
To just really make sure you're paying attention. I want to say welcome and thank you to all 8 of you for volunteering to participate in this important process for us. I would also like to say thank you to our team for their hard work and energies and efforts, because this document is actually not something that we just prepare at this time of year. This is something carefully monitored on a, honestly bi-weekly and more often than that manner. And I also want to just lead with saying thank you to Gary Bennett and his entire team for their incredible stewardship of this. And so as we talk through tonight, I just want to let you know, every time that we get a chance to talk about making an incredible experience for our kids and our staff who work here, I get excited, and you get to be a part of that as well. So we've had an opportunity to talk about a vision here. And the short story is we've leaned into a vision question of, how do we inspire, how do we inspire to make a joyful community of learners? And what that really means is, do kids want to be there? Do adults want to be there? Do parents want them to be there? And if those are in place and the kids are having great experiences during the school day and outside of their school day, and we can provide those opportunities and experiences for them, if we give one kid a spark and they get a chance to say, I didn't even think that was a career, and I'm going to try it. And they were a 5th grader and they heard a guest speaker come in or something to that effect. That gets me excited. So what this isn't is just a bunch of numbers for us. Please think of kids, please think of staff, which you already do. That's how I try to view this. And it's got to be a living document for us. One of the ways that we talk through this together is through a bigger strategic design. Now, the board has been gracious to work with me in my first year here in our district to help us revamp our strategic design process. Our old strategic design, which is great, I of course inherited it, and we last updated it a few years ago because just life is happening. We were very busy in 2017, 2018. You don't have a copy of this, so sorry for those searching. That was always a fun teacher trick for you. But basically, what we did is we are bringing tonight a very exciting new strategic design to our board for them to be the first to interact with it and hopefully approve it tonight and put it into action. But what that means for our budget process is moving forward, we're going to hopefully carefully align specific items and be able to talk about how does that match and meet our needs. And so this comprehensive strategic design is one avenue that we're going to use. And it's really, we had input from community, students, staff. We worked on it an entire year. We've gotten a lot of good feedback. And we're going to be pulling together data to say, if we're making certain budget moves and decisions, how does that align with our strategic plan? So Gary, if you could just switch to the next part. One of the key parts of our strategic design is what do we hope for all of our kids out when they leave Sherwood School District? So what is a portrait of a student? What do we hope for with them? And so within the strategic design itself, you're going to see really a deep commitment to a high academic experience, a rigorous, enriching, moldable academic experience. But you're also going to see sitting alongside that is a really engaging co-curricular part of their life in their day. Because I know for some of our students, the only way we get them there during the day is because they've got marching band after school, or they've got a club that they wouldn't have access to if they weren't in school. And I kid you not, when I hear that story from a kid, I say, that is awesome. And they are brave enough to say, this actually is why I get up and make sure I don't miss my classes. And so we want to make sure that we really have a well-rounded experience for our students. And we hope that this budget represents that. Meaning, how do you maintain and make sure to ensure positive experiences? And we work really hard on that. We aren't going to just, for the first time in a long time in Sherwood's history, we're actually going to put some metrics to that. I know this group may like that a little. Some of the metrics are going to be like, we want to look at some of our data. So what does our data show? And of course, we have our traditional data that we look at, and we look at test scores and some grades and other things that are really important. We'll continue to monitor those. But we're also going to start looking at some of our co-curricular activities and engagement. What are our numbers? What do they show? What are kids interested in? What are things that we need to offer that we don't currently offer? Who's involved in CETV? Who's not? Who's involved in different opportunities throughout our pre-K, post-high experience here at Sherwood? And so out of that, we often have to work together with our board, and I want to have a joint agreement for us as we move forward into next year with some emerging priorities. We're committed to making sure that we have great success for our kids. We want to focus on 3rd grade reading. We want to get kids in the building to attend. We want to make sure that they're on track during 8th grade for math. And 9th grade is a critical year. If they're on track in their first trimester of 9th grade, the percentage of them graduating on time goes up exponentially. And then lastly, we'll keep paying close attention to high school graduation. Often people use that as the only North Star. And for us, we don't want to wait. There's a lot of pressure on our high school. So that conversation actually starts in elementary school. People don't think about it as much, but we know when students struggle early, we want to make sure to give them some supports. As I mentioned before, in future years, when you hear a budget, when you hear a message, we're gonna tie it directly back. You'll see it tied to a strategic design and even some numbers associated with that. And hopefully that will feel really good for our budget teams. But then also we want to make sure that we are flexible and adapting. That strategic design is not going to be a static product for us. It's going to be living. And the budget team is going to help be a part of that process. We need to make appropriate shifts and moves in order to meet the needs of our kids today. And so again, I'm appreciative. I know most of you read my letter several times and you know it and memorized it, so I won't want to read that to you. But I did want to say thank you to this team as we get to hear from Gary and hear a little more of what we're excited about. Thank you, Gary.
Okay, thank you. So we'll move into the the numbers part of this presentation, and the agenda officially calls for a presentation and discussion at the end, which I think we'll certainly have. But if you have questions along the way or comments or thoughts, don't hesitate to ask. Remember, they're better asked in real time. Just let me know what they are, and I'll just go through this and we'll have a conversation as we go. So looking back at the 24-25 fiscal year, some things went really well for us. Just the local option in general is huge, provided a ton of stability and helped us avoid like significant reductions. And we produced slightly more revenue than we thought out of that. I think about $160,000, which is really great. Our general fund balance is continuing to increase, which is one of our key goals, moving towards the board's policy of 8%. We're heading in that direction. And in addition to setting aside reserves for ending fund balance, we're continuing to set aside money and transfer to capital projects to prepare for the future. And so I think we're doing a pretty good job of building our general reserves and net positions. So that's a good thing. We face some challenges though. One, just like everybody, our costs are rising faster than revenue, just generally speaking. And I think that's true for businesses, individuals. That's just generally true, or at least historically true, and we're at the lagging end of that. Just because cost of peanut butter only went up by 3% in the last year, that doesn't mean it didn't go up by 10% over the year and a half before that. So we're still feeling the effects of those. Enrollment, we're some good news on enrollment. I've got listed the challenge here, but our enrollment for next year is about 20 kids ahead of where we were last year at this time. So looking forward to who's already enrolled. So that can look a lot different between now and August. We got a lot of time to go, but that's good news because it was trending the other direction last year at this time. But we're still facing the challenge of a large senior class exiting. Last year, 430 kids entered, and we had 240 something kindergartners come in. And so when you move that many out and that few in, you've got some challenges regarding enrollment. So that appears to be stabilizing a little bit, and so that's good. A challenge that I'm sure most people in this room have heard about is we have pockets of large class sizes throughout the district. We have more pockets of actually small class sizes than large class sizes, but the ones that I think frustrate all of us are the ones that are the higher class sizes. And especially after paying for a local option and supporting that, I think that's a challenge that we're working to deal with. And then lastly, just a lack of state funding for high cost disabilities. That's we spend a lot of money on that. It's what we believe in is we want to do the right thing by kids, and help from the state to offset at least some of the costs of that would be a helpful thing. So on to our just the financial forecast, just a few key numbers here. At the end of 22-23, we were at $945,000 in ending fund balance. Not much over 1%, 1.5% of our total revenues. In 23-24, we jumped up to 2.43. This is the forecast at the end of March, which is almost 2.7 million. And as I've got a chance to process April financials, which I hadn't done by the time this had to be published, I think that number might be closer to 2.9 this year. And so I think this was maybe a little bit of a conservative estimate. So hopefully we'll see that continuing to go up into the 2.8s or 2.9s. And so that would be a nice jump in ending fund balance. So I think this year is looking pretty on track and in pretty good shape. Looking forward, the strength, that local option employs over 51 people. And that's just huge. We've got our state school fund increasing by nearly 7% this year, which is a really nice jump. We had a lot of cost pressures on us this year. We had PERS rates rising. We had contractual raises and step bonuses for teachers. And so that couldn't come at a better time for us. And then on top of that, there's some important bills pending in the legislature. The one on PERS rate, I'm happy to report, has passed. And so 2 years of temporary rate relief have passed for us. They lowered our PERS rate by 1.68%. And when you look at a payroll the size of ours, 40 million some odd dollars, that 1.6% makes a big difference. So that's really helpful. And there's a couple bills pending on special education we'll talk about a little bit later on when we talk about the legislative update. Challenges, we've got reductions or flat funding in some pretty large grants. And when that happens to you, you've got two choices really. You're either going to take the funds the grant used to pay for and push them into the general fund, or you're going to not do those things anymore. And so, but fortunately, we've been able to absorb those things mostly into the general fund, but that just puts more pressure on the general fund and causes a little bit of a squeeze. And there's a slide later that kind of shows what that looks like. Just the same, looking ahead, we think expenses are going to continue to rise faster than revenues. We've got another PERS rate jump probably coming in the next cycle would be my guess for a couple of reasons. We can get into it a later time. As it draws near, that's 18 months away, and just negotiated salary contracts and just general expenses are moving up pretty quickly. And then the enrollment piece, which again, I'm happy to see our data really looking better than I anticipated at this point in time for next year, so that's good, and this year as well. So legislative update, I think the biggest thing here is that we had the state revenue forecast came out on May 14th on Tuesday of last week, and so this meeting was very intentionally scheduled after that revenue forecast comes out, so we knew kind of what we were looking at. Unfortunately, the news wasn't as good as what we had hoped for. There was about $750 million less to spend than the legislature thought they would have in February, according to the state economist. The co-chairs released their budget, and they released what they referred to as an austerity budget. I'm not sure the exact words, but that was pretty close to what they said. And they pared down from what the state economist said, leaving themselves some wiggle room. So the good news is the co-chairs still have a little bit of money to invest. Hopefully that means our $11.4 billion state school fund is solid, and potentially we'll get a little bit more money, although I would say the chances are probably less now of those critical special education funding bills passing now than it was 3 months ago. So with less money to spend and lots of competing priorities, doesn't mean they won't pass, doesn't mean we won't get some of them. I think, well, so we'll see what happens with that. Good news is the PERS rate relief is passed, and all in all, we're in pretty good shape, and I'll talk about that in just a second. Here's what our revenue assumptions are based on in this budget. We're based on our enrollment for this year. So, and remember, we are funded at either the highest of this year's students or next year's student count. Depending on which one's higher, we get that level of funding. So by budgeting on this year's enrollment numbers, we've taken a pretty conservative approach in that regard. It assumes a state school fund of $11.4 billion. This does assume that the high cost stability fund measure passes, which I just mentioned was less likely than we thought earlier. I think it's really important to note that the sky isn't falling. Our enrollment looks better. That helps us. If our enrollment goes up, we'll get some extra funds for that. We are carefully watching what passes in the legislature. We may get some if we don't get all of it, but if we happen to get some enrollment growth and we get a little bit of that special education funding, suddenly we're in a pretty good position. So we're watching it carefully. As all of you know, budgets are out of date. By the time you get home tonight, this budget will be out of date. There will be no news there'll be new news out there. And so we will manage the budget. We will watch it carefully, and we will make adjustments as we need to. And we're still in a good place. Whatever we have to do will be relatively minor. And when I look around at what some of our colleagues are going through in other districts. You know, I'm just feeling very fortunate that we're looking like. So given those assumptions, here's what our revenue forecast looks like. I'm looking at nearly over $74 million in just operating revenue next year.
Can I just step in? Sorry. This is not a trick game, but we do have a couple of, odd pages missing if you're trying to follow along here. And so we can get you those printed. So for right now, every other one, we just pay attention to what we put up there. There's just a couple of these pages missing, or at least I couldn't find them and I saw other
Thank you
people
for calling
searching.
that.
I think that's
She has some for Tamara.
The Harmony isn't that stupid. She's special. She printed her own.
Oh, no, I like that guy.
I did too.
I just got-
I'm with you.
Anyway, I just, sorry, Gary, I just wanted
Sorry
to.
about that.
No, it's okay.
It's not Gary.
So, one thing on this budget page that I think is worth pointing out, just so everybody's aware. If you just took a glance at this, you might look and say, well, why is our levy going up by 8.2% next year? When it went up by 4.9% the following year, that's a pretty substantial jump. What changed? Well, this is actually just our budgeted growth last year. And we brought in closer to $6.17 million from our levy this year. And so that puts that much more in line with the trend you're seeing there. And I think that's a pretty solid number, 6.5. So that's good news. And overall, pretty healthy revenue growth. And again, you can see just the steady growth and beginning fund balance. And that's also good news for us, seeing that going in a positive direction. On the expenditure side, these are the assumptions we used. We are officially still negotiating with our classified staff on their contract. And again, classified staff is everybody basically is not a teacher or an administrator. There are a few other staff that fall under another group called confidential, but that's who it is. It's a large employee group. And we've come to a tentative agreement with them. They'll vote later this week. And then if they approve it and the board approves it, then we'll officially be done. But the proposed cost of living adjustments are taken care of in here. I assume that PERS bill has passed, which it has. I just wanted to note in here, this isn't really an assumption, it's more of a note, but I thought it was worth pulling out that our liability and property insurance are increasing over 20% next year. That's what we're anticipating. Our insurance agents are telling us to brace for that. Like they just reached out to schedule a meeting with me today and they want to meet in person. So that might mean this. That probably means the first number is 2. But they told that they gave us a lot of heads up on that. They said the insurance market generally, just across the nation is stressed from floods to tornadoes to wildfires to, and that puts pressure on the system as a whole on the secondary market. And then just in Oregon, we've had in the last several years, we've had wildfires. We had over $1 million claimed from the ice storms just here in Sherwood. Other districts had larger ones than that. We had the big roof collapse down in Medford recently. And so all those things hit our insurance pool. And so that number is going to go up to $1.3 million. And that's a pretty significant hit. In the last 3 years, we've had a 20% raise, a 9% raise, and a 20% raise. So when you compound those together, that's a significant increase in cost going to insurance. You're probably seeing the same thing on your homeowner's insurance. If not, I guess as you will fairly soon.
Does the state have any kind of disaster relief funds that does hit us? I know federally they can do some things. I just don't know where all that money's going.
Yeah, I don't honestly know that much about the state. I know that there's FEMA out there, but I don't know what the state equivalent of FEMA is. They have some funds available. The governor declared a disaster and money for wildfire relief or for some specific.
That's something we can bank on.
Nothing we're banking on. No, we're building our insurance portfolio to cover.
Districts who are experiencing that. Not necessarily.
There's a certain bill right now that's pretty sure that they're discussing specific wildfire relief support, which is kind of additional support that districts experience where they didn't basically get enough support to redo or to help get. They had some funding that it was appropriated to them, but then this was a specific additional support for them. And these are very small districts. That hasn't passed, I just was saying that's a conversation.
So and I think this is a stress for a lot of different industries, I'm sure, but that's just something you should all know about. It's a reality for us. The other thing in here, you'll see our staffing levels are actually very similar to last year. There are some reallocations, and that, you know, staff follow student populations. Our elementary schools are growing. And so we're adding some staff, trying to add some staff to elementary and moving staff from school to school, just kind of depending on where the kids go. That's a typical pattern, though. That's nothing new for us, and that happens every year. And we do expect our reductions to be largely through attrition. We've had a lot of retirees this year. We've had people leave jobs for a variety of reasons, and so and that's pretty standard as well. People just take jobs in other states or move on to become a teacher, become an administrator or whatever the case is, or move to become a teacher. So we expect those to be through attrition, and so that's good news. Also, when you put all those together, here's what our general fund expenditures look like. There's a few things worth pointing out in here that I think are interesting. So if our salaries are going up by 6.9%, and we have a PERS rate, which hits our associated payroll costs, an increase in the PERS rate, you would probably anticipate that the associated payroll costs would go up by more than the salaries, just because you've got that added cost on those. And that is actually correct, but you might remember we budgeted $800,000 for unemployment insurance last year. We were able to pare that number down to $200,000 that we put aside in the budget this year, and I'll show you a little bit more about that later on in the budget. But that $600,000 helps substantially there. We budgeted last year that we're not budgeting this year. You can see a pretty healthy rise in purchase services, but that followed a 1% rise last year in purchase services, and we actually are. That was just not enough money budgeted. In fact, tonight at the board meeting, I'll come to the board asking for transfers of contingency into the support services function code to cover that. I think we actually budgeted a little bit too much for supplies and materials last year, so we pared that back a little bit. And then you see other objects going up by 29%. That's where our insurance sits, and so that's a big part of that. It's a big part of that jump that's driving that. And then our transfers, we'll talk about it coming up here there on the next slide. So the first two transfers are more of like operating transfers. The nutrition services transfer, every district really has to subsidize their nutrition services. It costs a lot of money to serve those meals. We charge a very low price relative to the price of food. We didn't raise our prices for several years. Even before the pandemic, up until last year, we started bumping them a little bit. And GIA is doing a great job of increasing participation in nutrition services program. We're up at every school in the district. Oxview went to free meals, breakfast and lunch for all, and their participation went up 245% at Oxview. So a massive increase in production there. And she's doing a really good job at schools where it's not free of bringing in more and more kids. And so as we sell more and more foods with the same staff levels, our contribution from the district goes down. And that's really what her goal is to serve kids food they want, and at the same time bring down the contribution the district makes. She's doing a great job with that. Athletics is just a 5% increase from last year, and their costs are going up such that that's maybe a little bit of a squeeze on the athletics department, just like the rest of us are feeling. They're feeling it as well. The other two transfers are more capital reserve transfers. Those transfers were $400,000 and $100,000 respectively last year. And the idea is that we will increase those, the plan is to increase those by $50,000 a year until they get to a level where we're sustainable. And so our curriculum might cost us, it's kind of rapidly, $700,000 to $800,000 a year. We've got some money set aside in reserves, but if we don't start adding substantially to that, we're going to hit a point where we're going to have to all of a sudden come up with $700,000 to $800,000 a year. Much better to build a pile of money and slowly make this a line item in your budget. Once it's in there as a line item, it's much easier to sustain than it is to carve something out and add it in there. And so that's kind of the idea, is to do it incrementally. And so this year we're setting aside $600,000 for those. Next year I would anticipate it to be $700,000. At least that's the goal. We'll make that decision next year, or you'll make that decision next year, but we'll see what that looks like. So I mentioned the grants were causing us some problems. I think this slide really shows the magnitude of those challenges with the flat funding of grants. I was hopeful that after the state revenue forecast, we might see some relief in these grants, and we still might. There's still conversation with the legislature about shoring some of this up and there being a little bit more money here. We don't know though, that's the short answer, but I was hopeful to have better news on this front. Maybe this problem would go away and we would get fully funded in these grants. But we're still facing this problem. Hopefully it gets a little bit smaller. And this is actually one of the areas when I say the sky isn't falling, where the budget assumes these grant numbers look like this. If these improve, that is a help to the general fund. And I think this is one of the areas where we're most likely to get a little bit of help from the legislature. Would be on this, because it sort of sits outside the general fund and it comes from the corporate activities tab. And this is just a summary of our budget altogether. It just sort of shows, it doesn't sort of show, it actually shows just our operating revenues and beginning fund balances, our total resources, and our total expenditures. A couple things worth noting on this page is again, just the trend in beginning fund balance. That's what we want to see. We put aside slightly more in contingency this year. That's what we want to see, are those numbers increasing and keep heading in the right direction. The last slide, the last few slides here are our appropriation summary. This is the level at which the board and the budget committee, we talk about the major fund and function level. This is the level where the board and budget committee authorize spending. And if we spend over these amounts in any of these categories, we need to come back and ask you for permission before we spend the money. Can't spend the money and then come back and beg for it. We have to ask you beforehand. And so it's important to look at this carefully. Couple of interesting things on here. If you look at the FTE for just the general fund, for example, it looks like, well, there is about 4 more FTE in the budget this year than last year. We're not actually increasing FTE because we added about 8 FTE after the budget was passed last year. We added teachers to deal with some of the class size pockets we could afford to deal with. We added some IAs to support in those classrooms. We added some special education staff to start another skills program at Archer Glen, and among other things. And so we hired a full-time nurse. So those expenses, so we're actually going to be down a little bit, about 3 people from where we are boots on the ground right now, but it's in the budget scheme of things, it looks like there's more. That makes sense. We're not actually adding staff. I just wanted to make sure that was clear. But we are budgeting for more staff than we budgeted for last year. One other thing on here that is good for you to know is under the special revenue fund on these enterprise and community services, you'll see a pretty good jump from the budget of last year to the budget of next year. For one, our budget last year was a little bit low, especially considering all of the appropriation, all of the increase in sales that G has brought in our food costs. When you sell more food, you buy more food. And so we get money on the revenue side, but we're also up on the expenditure side. There's also an outside possibility that a bill passes the legislature that all schools in the state become free and reduced meals for all, not free and reduced, free meals for all kids. And about 90% of the schools in the state, don't quote me on that number, but it's a high number in that neighborhood, have free meals for all students. And the number to actually close that gap is not that big. And so there's been talk that that will happen. And so we budgeted, but did not hire or make any changes for that to happen. So if it does happen, we're ready to hit the ground. If not, we just won't make those hires and budget more money that we need. But that's why that jump is there. And that's why that jump in staff is there too, because if we increase by 245% at all of our schools, there's some teams that can handle that with the team they have in place and some that will absolutely need more people. Moving down to some other appropriations, I think one change here is that last year we had a discussion in our budget committee about appropriating all of the funds in the 400 funds, our capital projects funds. Remember, those are funds that can't be used to hire staff, but they're used to deal with things like new playgrounds, new playground equipment, turf field repair, curriculum technology, capital expenditures. And last year, we just appropriated all of those funds, and that had been the case for years in this district. And after a conversation that was right on the money in this team last year, this year we put almost $5 million into contingency and appropriated only what we knew or thought we were going to spend. And then if we decide to spend more, we'll come back to the board. So that's an important change. I think we're noting a good change in practice. And then down below the 600 internal services fund, that is the fund where you see last year we budgeted $800,000, and this is the fund where we've essentially, in a simple term, set up a savings account to deal with classified unemployment. So when we saw last year we weren't spending much in there, we stopped putting money in the savings account and put it to the bottom line, which I think was the right thing to do. And then there's $289,000 in there right now, and so we are going to add another couple $100,000 for that this year. And we don't feel we'll spend that much money, but we are just thinking that it's possible that classified staff will be more aware of the opportunity to apply for it. We just don't know. And so we'll adjust that as it goes. But that's the change we made. Trying to balance kind of conservatism, making sure we have enough money with also not putting too much in there, making sure it goes towards our kids. So these are the tax and levy amounts.
About that contingency real quick. We had talked in our small group about, you know, the reserve and the percent of the fund balance, what that beginning fund balance is, and kind of how we compare it to other districts in terms of that rainy day fund. Do other districts put this type of contingency in that reserve, or is this just for 100%? Do they also appropriate for just capital projects, or do they count that as their part of their reserve?
Well, it is, I think it is it is a form of reserve, right? And when we're talking about that reserve, we're just talking about the general fund. And so when you look at a total appropriations summary on the, if it was all summed together and all the funds were summed together, our ending fund balance is closer to $12 million.
Yeah. I'm just wondering if we're apples to apples when we're
I think
looking at other districts and how they appropriate those reserves across their fund balance.
I think it's more like we've done it here.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we were operating in the outside the norm.
Okay.
But most don't do unappropriated balance. There is a fund, there is a code for unappropriated fund balance. But it's really hard to be able to access those funds if you need it. If you put it in contingency, it's a simple board action to pull it out. And so some districts actually do that, but they have probably reserves larger than what they should have. You know, some people save money for a rainy day, and it's raining for some of our kids today. And so you gotta balance the reserve and what it kids need. So that's why we don't do it that way. That answer your question?
Yeah.
So tax and levy amounts, this is one of the key pieces the budget committee does. And so we'll walk through these and spend just a little bit of time on them. The district permanent rate, those come out of Measure 5, where our tax rates were set at what they were at that point in time. They're fixed, we can't change it. And those funds become part of the state school fund formula. So those go into the mix for the state school fund. And some of them come back to Sherwood, but they all go into the pool and they're allocated based on the state school fund formula. The local option levy is different than that. Our voters set the rate at $1.50 per thousand. And it's expected to raise about $6.5 million, as I said. And the difference between it is all those funds come right to Sherwood. They go directly to us. And so that's a great thing for us, and we're truly grateful for that. The general obligation levy this year is just over $18 million. And so this is to repay, sorry,
Here, just to clarify, just in case anybody's watching at home, so the proportion that goes to the state school fund, that goes to Salem. We may or may not see all of that. It's up to Salem how much of that you see back. It's not just a pass through to say, so just to make it really clear to people, like that part of the tax goes to Salem, and then Salem decides what to do with it. Some of it comes back to Sherwood. The option levy stuff stays here and you can direct them.
Correct. And the state school fund money goes into the state school fund formula, which is decided by the legislature, it hasn't been changed in a long time. But that directs the Department of Education how to allocate the funds to schools based on a variety of factors. They were more complex than I understood when I decided to take this job, as you might imagine. So the general obligation bond, those are to pay for construction and all the new curriculum and technology in our district, all the things the bond paid for. This year we will owe 17,819, right in that neighborhood, 17,819,000. We collect our taxes, and I put this on here this year because I wanted people to know where this number came from. So I had to put a little bit of math on here for folks. We collect our taxes, a lot of them, the bulk of them in November and December, and we don't make these payments until May. And so over the course of that time, we'll earn about $300,000. So we subtract that from the amount that we need to collect. That makes sense. And so that leaves the net amount to be collected at about $17,519 million. And we typically collect, our historical collection rate is just about 97%. And so that 17,519,000 is 97% of the $18 million. That's how we got to that number. And so that's why that's in place. And so we actually levy more than we need to collect because we know we won't collect all of it.
So one thing, one thing, like the 300 delta one, is that this interest we hold on to, or what is that?
It's interest that it's essentially interest that we float. We just, we leave it in that account and we use the interest that we earn on the money that was the tax money that came in for the purpose of paying back the bond. We take the interest we earn on that money and we use it to pay back the bond. So we're not keeping people's money tax free, or
Gotcha.
that makes sense, or
Yeah.
interest free.
Okay.
Yeah. We're using it to pay down the debt. Yeah, that's good to know. Thank you for that. And then this is just our historical levy rates. And I think the two columns that are the most important. This is the average growth in assessed value over here. And you may remember from the local option campaign when we were learning about those, that assessed value goes up by 3% every year as a base value. That's the most it can go up is 3%, and our home price has been accelerating faster than that. So it's been going up by 3%. Anything above 3% is growth. So you can see that certainly since 2013, in here we've had growth, pretty good growth in our new building and new construction in our boundaries. That's been good news. The far right column is the bond rate per $1,000. So our levy rate is $1.50 per thousand, and that's operating money that comes into us. The bond rate, which pays for our schools, which is school construction and maintenance and things, is totally separate. When we went to the voters in 2016, our ballot manager said it would be $4.20 per thousand, is what we told the voters. Our first year out of the gate, we were at 4.33, so a little bit over what we told them. But then we've been on a steady decline every year, with one little blip where we had to bring in a little more money because we didn't quite have enough money that year. But you can see a general downward trend. 2025, the current year, $3.37 per thousand. So it's at 83 cents lower than what we promised voters, and I would expect it to go still lower yet next year. So I just want to point that out that I didn't have anything to do with the estimate at the time, but the estimate that was made with kind of a conservative prognosis in mind, a conservative thought process in mind, with the idea that we under promise and over deliver. And so I think that's happened in this case. And so our rates, that's good to see our rates coming down. I just think it's important that people know that.
I think it is super confusing for people. I know it is. When they look at their tax bill and they just see a lump sum and they don't understand that one's variable, one's fixed, one and two are fixed, you know, and it's just a ton of money regardless. And so I think your explanation definitely like helps people understand the breakdown. If we can do them to listen to this meeting, that helps, because otherwise I think it all just meshes together and feels like a lot more than people thought they understood it to be, you know. It's always a tough thing to explain to people.
No question. It's you spend a lot of time with it, it makes sense, but if you don't, the first couple of times you look at it, it doesn't
Yeah.
make any sense. So-
And no matter how much you understand it, Sherwood Jackson's feel high.
And they're both called levies.
Yeah, yeah.
And we don't have any way to put our own kind of flyer in text. Statement envelopes.
You know, we did a lot of marketing around it, I didn't personally, but when we did the levy to help people understand it.
Uh-huh.
And when we have individual conversations with people, they were like, oh, okay, I get it, and you can't spend the money on the same things, like it's not just,
Yeah, or
You
you
don't
can just
just
show
receive
them,
it,
hey,
you
this is
walk
what
with
you
it.
voted in,
yeah,
this is what you would have been paying, but because, you know, this has been going up, like, this is what you would have paid, this is what you are paying,
Yeah.
right? And
It
then-
wouldn't be
and that shows
horrible
an
to,
actual
like,
number.
create something that reminds people regularly. It's a lot,
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good idea for us to think of.
yeah,
Maybe we can't put it in the envelope, but we could do something at
Get
the
it.
same time,
Get it out.
that's like. Kind of showing that.
Yeah, it's just very simple,
Yeah.
like, this is what you would have paid, this is what you voted, but this is where it's at
Yeah.
today.
But I would also add to that, try to figure out
Yeah.
what it's doing for you.
yeah, of course.
What's the value?
And I think we were working on that back last October about, since it was like the new year, and we were talking about what is our levy doing for us? Let's keep reminding our
Yeah.
voters what they're getting.
Next, you're gonna
out of
probably
this.
wanna vote again,
Yeah, absolutely.
right, when it
Because the
sunsets.
hardest part about a levy is renewing it the first time, not
Yeah.
actually passing it.
I feel like it was pretty hard.
It's pretty hard, but you did an amazing job.
I feel like it was kind of hard.
That's good.
Yeah,
But I actually think that's a really good idea, because that also lets us kind of bucket out, here's the Salem, here's the stuff that we don't control.
Yeah.
You know, the Salem stuff, the Washington County stuff, here's the Sherwood stuff, and here's what the Sherwood stuff
it's,
goes to be.
when people move in and out of our district, or they're not paying attention maybe when their kids aren't in schools, you know, and so it is. I think it's really useful for people to understand how that process works, what we're able to use the money for and what we're not. That the rate changes, and we do our best to try to keep the rate as low as possible,
Mhm.
you know, those things matter. It
Yeah,
does
that
make a
creates
difference.
goodwill.
Yeah,
It's a good thing.
Thank you for that, and I think it's, we're always trying to be better as communicators, and I think it's, super helpful to hear. Just even you work through it a little bit, because I think that will help us. You know, I was even working with someone last week, a patron at a carnival hypothetically, who was asking about, so what does the ESD do? Where are they in our school? Meaning they just thought that was part of their, like, that was under my purview, right?
yeah,
And so I think some of the just clarity for folks when you're looking at that tax statement, I think that's super helpful. So thank you for that. It's good to hear.
That's good. I'm gonna keep it moving because we're.
Yep.
Pushing up against our time here. So we did put together an updated budget book. I think all the people in the meeting have a copy of it. It was actually linked in the packet for this. And there's also a version on our website that is meant to display in a more interactive fashion. This version, the version linked to this is a PDF, but there's a more interactive version on our website. It's also designed to work on a mobile phone, so it's pretty easy to see on a mobile phone as well. So it's a good new software package. I think it's gonna help us out. I think it will allow us to build a better budget book over time that includes things like enrollment data, strategic plan metrics, or progress on that, things of that nature, really tell the story.
Moving budget numbers, to
Right.
Human society, man.
That's it.
And on that note, so I started on the budget committee. The spring, that's what season it is right now. The spring, right before Gary started, right before we identified all of the issues that we've been dealing with for years. And the stuff that's in this document compared to what was given that first time showing up is just night and day difference. So it's a real testament to how much work you've done, Gary, and how much work your staff has done. And yeah, we are able to have a much clearer vision into what's actually happening. Yeah.
Thank you, I appreciate that. And you know, our new controller put together this whole budget document. She did a lot of the technical work of that, and so she did a great job with that, Kathy Foreman. And Stephanie and Kathy built a lot of this budget, and they worked really hard on this, and a lot of the work is there, and all these processes, so. I just want to make sure they're called out, and the whole team really did great work. I feel pretty fortunate to be working. Thank you for that. So that's the end of what I have, so I'll turn it back to the chair and we'd have a discussion if there's one, we'll see how that goes.
Okay, so any other discussion? I know we've had some discussion, any other discussion for people?
I think discussion, I feel fortunate that we're in the position we're in. I do, I mean, I look around at all the other districts around us and I feel like worried, you know, knowing how that feels, and it's a terrible position to be in, to think about what cuts you're gonna make and how it's gonna impact kids, and I feel so grateful that we are in a very steady place and that you guys have a very steady approach just to looking forward, that we kind of like to keep things moving slowly and moving forward, and that approach makes me feel comfortable, so I'm very grateful, and I second everything about this book is so good. And I know you don't wanna like show what we used to have and what we have now, but truly it is, it's night and day difference. And so if community members could see what we used to work with and what we have now, I think that they would be amazed at the transparency of this current budget. So thank you for doing that.
I just want to reiterate too that coming in 3 years ago to what we all experienced, districts around this are going through something more chaotic than that. And getting ready to see and 80 teachers and 115 out in what Brent Reynolds. They just let go. And the 90-day difference, like Abby was saying, to what we were, but this is like, it's like beautiful. This is amazing to look at, and I love that we have strive to get better and look at our mistakes and not go back to what we had, and that transparency is there, and we're working together to continue to be stable.
Okay, any public testimony that was submitted?
Public comment tonight.
One other point of clarification, just in case anybody's watching us at home. So we had some discussion, some pre-discussion in small groups. So just to let people know, we did ask a lot of dumb questions about like, oh, what's this number? What's that number? Why is this percentage changing? We just didn't feel the need to bore everybody by listening. So thanks for facilitating.
It wasn't about boring everybody. We didn't do it that way so we would bore people. We just, Gary thought it was a better process that we ask one question. And I think he's right. I think we had more in-depth conversations in a smaller format where we didn't feel stupid asking. But yes, I'm glad you pointed out that we actually took the time to do that. It's not boring.
I got to get grilled 4 times, not 1.
You probably feel very confident in
No,
your
it's actually-
presentation.
That's actually much better. I thought we just had really good. I thought it was good.
Okay, anything else for our deliberation? Okay. Okay, so I am gonna recommend a motion. That was the time for that, right?
Yes.
Okay, I wanna move the budget committee to approve the proposed budget for 25-26 as submitted by the superintendent. All in favor?
Take a second.
Second.
One second.
Looks like a lot of people are willing. It's so good.
Not ready.
Is there a second?
Is there a second? Yes, there's
Yes,
10
second.
seconds. Yeah. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Motion passes 8-0. Harmony said 8, so I'm gonna-
Yep.
okay, and then we also are, we have a motion. We have a motion to approve the 2025-26 levy on the district's permanent rate of $4.8123 per $1,000 of assessed value. We also are moving to approve the local option levy for $1.50 per $1,000 of assessed value. And lastly, within tax levies, we're moving to approve the levy amount of $17,232,569 for debt service. Is there a second? Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that also passes. 3 hammers.
Killed it.
Thank you.
Going once, going twice, sold.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Happy to do